I'm obviously Tim Boson. Nice to see you. Some of you came to part one. We're doing part two. Recording okay? Good. Welcome all those who are watching the recording tomorrow or the next day or whatever. We have our faithful few here live. So tonight we're doing Introduction to Byzantine Art, part two. Sounds very mechanical. We're looking at what is traditionally called the Middle Byzantine period. And this is a very interesting period. Now, I've put this slide on deliberately. Those of you who were here last time may remember that I referred to a French art historian, Byzantine art historian, called André Grabat. Very famous, excellent art historian. And I mentioned that he said Byzantine art is like a symphony has been written, and each time a musician conducts it and alters it to their course. Now, what we're looking at here is what we saw actually last time, very briefly, which is from Sant'Apollinare Nuovo. It is the Theotokos in the mosaic of the Basilica, late 6th century. And what we're going to look at in more detail later is another Theotokos, this time, of course, from the apse of the Hagia Sophia. And this was put in 867. We have an actual date, although it's had to be heavily restored, I'm afraid, because, of course, since the Ottoman conquest in 1453, et cetera, it was covered over, and it was restored in the 1930s. And after the Hagia Sophia was made a museum, and as some of you will know, of course, it is now back as a mosque. I think, sadly, but that's my opinion. Right. So I wanted you to see that what you've got is the symphony, the Theotokos, presented to us in a very similar way, but of course, altered slightly by the mosaicists. This is what I think André Grabat was getting at, was the tuning of the symphony, the way it was conducted. So that was the point I just wanted to make with that slide. But I'm going to start with a little bit of history. We have to have some history. I think, Caroline, can I ask you to give me the next slide, please? Thank you. Technology, there's always something that happens. We have to have a little bit of history because those of you who were engaged last time will remember we finished virtually with the iconoclastic controversy when icons and church decorations were being destroyed. So I just want to give you the sort of background to this now. The background historically, stop me if I'm blocking you, you can see, this is the Byzantine Empire in the 8th century. And you may remember the last one, and I haven't put the comparison up, but you may remember the last one was the time of Justinian, when all of Syria and Egypt, parts of North Africa, Italy, and even a part of Spain was still part of the empire. And that's all been eroded. And the biggest event that took place to destroy, particularly the eastern provinces, was, of course, the rise of Muhammad and the Islamic invasions. And the Islamic invasions took Syria, first of all, moved into Egypt, North Africa, and you can see where the arrows are. And eventually, of course, they cross over into Spain. So it's a huge event for Byzantium. And Byzantium almost doesn't survive. The empire is almost destroyed. There are two, as we'll come on to, important sieges down here, 674 to 678. Now, we're not sure whether this was a genuine siege or not. The historical sources are a bit ambiguous about it, but certainly the Arabs had got to Constantinople and the empire was threatened. And then later in 717 to 718, that was a definite siege. We've got that corroborated. And Constantinople nearly fell. Fortunately, they were able to call on help, Byzantines, from their Bulgar neighbors who they'd been at war previously with, who came and attacked the Arabs from behind. Disease set in, and in the end, it was a fiasco. But the key to the success of the Byzantines in keeping them out was this stuff here, Greek fire. And it was a form of napalm which they could shoot out of a sort of weapon here, and they destroyed 2 Arab fleets by using Greek fire. So a wonderful invention for, and then, of course, it then disappeared. There's no one quite sure what the recipe was. And lots of experiments have been carried out. And I have a friend who carried out several experiments, did suffer quite a few burns, but proved that you could shoot napalm out of a tube. So this was the saving. And you can see that's from a manuscript. Now, the villain of the piece with regard to iconoclasm has often been referred to Leo the Isaurian. Leo wasn't from Constantinople himself, and he was the main commander who resisted the 1718 siege. And Leo has often been stamped as the beginning of iconoclasm. Now, this isn't absolutely entirely certain, but the problem is people were writing, particularly Theophanes, who was writing much later, looking back, he gets the charge of villainy because certainly his son, who will come on to, Constantine V, was a big iconoclast. He did not believe that the holy people could be represented. So what was iconoclasm about? Well, this is it really. It's the Old Testament. It's quite simply the commandments that you can't make any graven images. And the problem was, how can human beings in any way describe what is divine? So that was the issue. Now, the iconophiles, those who loved the icons, or as some people call them, the iconodules, the slaves of icons, said, yes, but the icons we've got and the representations we've got are actually God-given because they were done without human hand to start with. And what we do now is just copy them. And therefore, they're perfectly legitimate. They're not graven images. And besides that, anyway, they're not really, we don't really see them as the real thing. What we're doing is using them like a heliograph, like a mirror. We're sending our thoughts and our divine prayers through the icon up to the divine above. So they're seen as a sort of medium. So these were the arguments. Now, of course, it also got a bit political because the monks and the monasteries were very in favor of the icons and the politicos were less. Now, it looks with the latest research that what really happened was that the armies who defended the frontiers against the Arab invasion were very influenced by Islam and influenced by the idea, and didn't like it when they were criticized by the Muslims, saying, how can you possibly have a divine vision? This can't be true God. So they were very influenced by that. So there was a lot of feeling in the army. And I always think of our Civil War, where you've got the new Cromwellian army, the new Protestant army being quite fierce in their Protestantism, compared with the much more relaxed and certainly with the royalists, a much more, not a truly Catholic, but more high church reaction. And you've got that difference going on. So here we've got some illustrations of what happened with iconoclasm, much later manuscript, a 9th century manuscript, a lovely one actually from the Moscow State Museum, showing an icon here actually being destroyed. And over here, again from a different manuscript, but we've actually got King Constantine V ordering a church to be destroyed. So it became quite a political tense pull. Now, interestingly enough, the monks had very strong allies, and I'm sure all the women here will understand it, that females of the Byzantine Empire were much more devoted to the icons than the males. I'm not going to give any explanation as to why that is. Perhaps they're just very handsome, some of these icons. Some of these saints were very good looking. And there were going to be some reactions. But before we get there, I just want to show you this church, which is one of our few examples where decoration from the iconoclastic period has survived. And it's interesting why it survived. This is the Hagia Irene, to peace, the holy peace. And it's very near the Hagia Sophia, which we looked at last time. And of course, we will be looking at again. So this is the palace area here, the Hydrodome. So there's the Irene, and there's the outside of it. A very strong, powerful church. And it survived. Why we've got the decoration? It survived because after the Ottoman conquest, it was not turned into a mosque. It was actually used as an armory, the storing of arms. So they did not strip it in the way that, or cover it over in the way that many churches in Constantinople were. So here's the inside of the church. You can see it's very much based on the Hagia Sophia. The architecture is very based on the design. But here, looking in the apse, so you've got the dome here, looking in the apse, you can see the detail here. What you've got is a plain cross. And that was the symbol that was used. So all the figurative art was destroyed or ripped out, painted over, and that was the period of iconoclasm. Of course, monks hid some icons, but for art historians, there's a great dearth of material in this period, in the 8th century, just a great dearth because of iconoclasm. Now, the end of iconoclasm was still doing a bit of politics, but I want to get some of the art in here as well. Our first reaction against iconoclasm and restoring to the iconophiles comes from this amazing lady here, Irene of Athens. She married Leo IV, and she was quite an amazing woman. Now, when Leo died, she had a young son, Constantine. And these relationships can be difficult, can't they? As Constantine grew up in his teenage years, he rebelled against her. She had been acting essentially as regent. Now, this is the bit where you may remember last week I quoted Lecky, the moral historian, about how awful Byzantium was. Guess what Irene does? She stages a palace coup against her son and has him blinded. Exactly. Because that was a way he would never be eligible again to become emperor. And we don't know what happened to him. We don't know if the blinding killed him or what. The sources don't tell us. But that sort of makes you, she was a tough lady. She ended up herself actually being exiled, having to weave, and only survived. She obviously wasn't a good weaver because she only survived a year after that. But this was the problem with Byzantium and the coups, because they followed the Roman principle of the best person for the emperorship, this primus, the idea of the first person. It didn't automatically go through families. And as I mentioned last time, people, of course, emperors tried to get their sons and their family involved, but there was always this thing hanging over the empire that someone could say, I'm better than you. And of course, most importantly, I've got the army on my side, or I've got a military on my side. And so it gave this instability, which we found in the Roman Empire continues in the Byzantine Empire, huge instability and lots of court vying and dealing and wheeling. Well, we know in our own medieval courts were pretty bad. So we know that was going on, and we only have to think, I know we have an expert of Anne Boleyn in the audience, we have to think of Anne Boleyn, who of course came to stay in St. Albans at Sir Roger Lee's house, which is where the nunnery was. In your book, I hope. But we know that, that those periods, there were lots of vying, and in Byzantine Empire, it was just really bad at some points, really difficult to get any stability. Anyway, Irene is back in favor of icons, and she wants to reintroduce them, having got rid of her son. But when she's overthrown, there's another regime of bringing iconoclasm back in, and icons get destroyed again. So there's just a short period where Irene brings the icons back. But it's another woman who brings back the icons, and that is Theodora down here. And Theodora, I put this in, it's very naughty really, with her son, Michael III the Drunkard. Poor old Michael. But Michael we'll see, was actually also in favor of bringing back the icons. So she was married to Theophilus, who was an iconoclast. And I brought to you for you to look afterwards, some of you. Sorry about the people who are on the recording, but this is a solidus. So you can actually see a gold coin like this, but it's of Theophilus. And this was given to me by my mentor. I once looked after his coin collection, a wonderful man called Philip Whitting. He had 15,000 coins, Byzantine coins, he collected. He was a school teacher. He collected these when they were very unfashionable. And he found himself in Greece during the end of the war, where he was building airfields. And he got so interested in the Byzantine coins, and there were plenty of them around, as you can tell, he started collecting them. And I ended up at one point curating his 15,000 coins. He wrote a lovely book about it. And he also gave me, which you can have a look at as well, some Byzantine wall tesserae. There's one there, very prized one, because it's a gold one. And they made the gold tesserae by glass, by putting a piece of gold leaf between two layers of glass. So afterwards, and I brought, because if you're like me, eyesight starts failing a bit, you might need a magnifying glass. So afterwards, do have a look at that. So this lady then, Theodora, brings back the icons. Now, I just popped this one in here because this is Julian the Apostate. We're going back along. My wife's just appeared. This is Julian the Apostate. And I wanted to this is just a bit of stylistic. You see how basic and primitive in a way the coins have become, the way they stamp them out, compared with a real portrait of Julian. Julian Apostate is a very interesting character because he was brought up as a Christian but rejected it and tried to bring the pagan world back in and paid the price for it. He failed. But it was really the style I wanted you to see how this is much more geared to the classical style, more realistic representation. And he's looking sideways. Remember last time, certainly for those of you who were here last time, the idea of engagement, because Byzantine art is all about engaging you. And all these figures here are engaging you, even though they are fairly schematic in the way that they do that. Just down here, this is actually Michael the Drunkard here, obviously in his young day, when Theodora was regent, and she called herself here Despina. And this is Michael's sister, Thecla. So the whole family were on the coin. The whole idea is with these coins, they're propaganda to reinforce the dynasty and tell you about the family and so on. And this one I like down here from the manuscript. Theodora had 7 children, 5 daughters and 2 sons. And these are the 5 daughters being instructed with an icon. So, and it's the grandmother who's supposed to be instructing them. Looks a bit like the Virgin, but there they are, 5 daughters, quite a household. I'm glad you nearly said something naughty then. Yes, right, good. Anyway, iconophile. So iconoclasm comes to an end, and it's celebrated by the patriarch, Photius I, giving a big sermon in the Hagia Sophia. And this is what he says. Christ came to us in the flesh and was born in the arms of his mother. This is seen and confirmed and proclaimed in pictures. The teaching made manifest by means of personal eyewitness and impelling the spectators to unhesitating assent. So, compelled. Does a man hate the teaching by means of pictures? The answer is obviously no. Then how could he not have previously rejected and hated the messages of the gospel? So he's tying the written word in with a visual word. You can't separate those out. So this was delivered on the 29th of March in the Hagia Sophia, the Holy Saturday. The Holy Saturday is the Saturday after the crucifixion, when Jesus lies in his tomb. And I wondered how that's a very early Easter, isn't it, the 29th of March? Very early. Needs to be checked, I think. I looked at that slide, I thought, that's odd, it's very early. And we're going back to the Hagia Sophia. Here it is again in all its glory, without, of course, you have to remove the minarets. And we're back to Theotokos. This was unveiled then, the first mosaic in the apse, just here, almost lost in this huge, massive cathedral church. But there she is, a massive figure holding Jesus. And remember, Jesus always has to appear as the young adult. And of course, that's true in Western art and medieval art as well, because you can't have a helpless baby as a god. And there she is, looking actually not straight at us, but almost slightly sideways. I say heavily restored, I'm afraid, because of what happened. So what he actually says about this, the images which the impostors had cast down, have pious emperors have again set up. And he said that to Michael III, the drunkard who was presumably reasonably sober at that time, to engage with those words. So this period then comes under what's called sometimes the Macedonian Renaissance. Art historians don't like that now because it confuses with the Western Renaissance and so on. But it's a period of revitalizing art. And it is interesting because the artists tend to look back again at more classical art, and you get some very interesting things happening to what's going on. I'm going to whip us off to Thessaloniki because I want you to have a look at the Hagia Sophia here. And the reason we're going to look there and come back is because in the Middle Byzantine art, we actually get, and it starts with Photius, telling us what Byzantine artists are trying to do inside a church. Now, you may remember from last time, we made this differentiation between the basilical church, the longitudinal church, and the centrally planned church. So the basilical church remains the main church of the West, like our cathedral, whereas the centrally planned church is the dominant church in the Orthodox religion. Now, the Byzantine art scheme for the Orthodox church is very related to its shape, because what Photius tells us is when you go into the church, you are going into another world. Right at the top is the most divine area. This is where the Holy Family reside, up there. Or also the Mother of God in the Alps, because she brings the divine into the world. As you go down, you then have the apostles, and at the lower level, you have the saints. So there's a hierarchy. Up at the top, the divine, and you work your way down. And it's a real scheme, so that this becomes what is applied to each Orthodox church. And it's described as if, and it might be you're going into heaven, and you're going certainly into the Holy Land, because at one level, usually at the pedentive level, or as we shall come on to this wonderful word I love, the squinch level, and I'll explain what a squinch is, you get scenes from the life of Christ. So there's a hierarchy, and there's a story, and because it goes round, it has a different concept of time. It's cyclical. So you can move around the Byzantine church according to each saint's day as you celebrate them, because the saints will be there. So it's a schema. We can't be absolutely certain, but they did describe the top as heaven, but the implications are there. And we certainly have the description of the ambassadors of the Prince of Kiev, Vladimir, who sent his delegates out to check which religion he should have. He didn't want to be pagan anymore. So he checked it out with the Jews, he checked it out with the Muslims, he went to the West, or his ambassadors did, so we are told. But when they went to the Hagia Sophia, they thought they were in heaven. So Vladimir chose. This is an apocryphal story, and who knows whether it's true or not, but it's a nice story. But we're going to look at the Hagia Sophia in Thessaloniki, another holy church. This is a real block, isn't it? A cube, a real cube. And we're going to, unfortunately, a lot of it has lost its decoration, but we're going to go right up into the top of the dome here. And this is what we see. This is Jesus, the apotheosis, going up to heaven, and he's looking down on us, all powerful. And around him are his apostles, and there is the Virgin seeing him off, waving goodbye as he rises up to heaven. And you'll see that they've kept the little classical palm trees as divisions. And the robe, the way the robes are done is just as if you're recalling classical Greek clothing. And this is the inscription. Well, old-fashioned translation. Ye men of Galilee, why stand ye gazing up into heaven? this same Jesus, which is taken up from you into heaven, shall so come in like manner as ye have seen him go into heaven. Acts 1:11. He's coming back. He's going up, but he's going to come back. So this, something like this would have been in the Hagia Sophia at that time, but has not survived. There he is. And it's quite a clever piece of artistic work, because you have to remember this is a dome. There's quite a distortion going on. So the mosaicists had to work out how the perspective works. But it's very classical. The angels elongated, very classical in the way they're carrying them up. Proportions perhaps not quite right. The head's a little bit too large. But there he is blessing us. But we're now going back to Constantinople and the Hagia Sophia, the great cathedral church, to see more of what we might call this Macedonian range of art. We're going to be looking at the entrance to the narthex, the royal door, which I did show you briefly last time. And we're also going to be looking at another entrance here, the vestibule here. Now, this is the entrance. This is the emperor's entrance, the royal door, so only the emperor would go through there. And remember, he's the vicegerent, the vicar of God on earth, so he has this enormous, important part in the church. He is not secondary. And we think it may be Leo VI. There's some uncertainty about it, but here is the emperor in an act of obeisance, in Greek proskenesis, bowing down to the Jesus with the Virgin, and we're not sure which archangel, but probably it is Gabriel because of the juxtaposition, but it could be Michael. We're not sure. So there it is. And what Christ has here written quite clearly is, Christ blesses the text, peace be with you, I am the light of the world, which is a bit of a paraphrase from John. But you can see again that it's quite naturalistic in many of the ways it's doing. It's rather terrifying look from the emperor, whoever he is, and his hands out of proportion, but the Jesus figure is beautifully done and the face very carefully crafted. When you think these are mosaics. Now, the other mosaic, we're going to look at the other entrance at the southwest vestibule. We've got a celebration really of the Hagia Sophia and Constantinople. We have the Virgin, again, as presenting herself as a Theotokos, and this side we have Justinian, who's offering the Hagia Sophia. There it is, a model of it, offering it. And over here we have Constantine offering the city. And they're carefully labeled so we know exactly who it is. Justinian, emperor, illustrious memory, and emperor amongst the saints. And look at the elaborate loros. This is the loros they're wearing, these garments full of gold, whole idea of magnificence, pearls on their crowns, and so on. Very powerful piece as you enter. So both entrances, both for the emperor to remind him that he is the servant of God and not to become too big for his boots, but also as you go in from this area where the main congregation would go in to remind you who built the church and why the city is there. Now, I've concentrated on monumental art and in this series, because it's introduction, it's the ones that you're most likely to see, and therefore it's quite relevant to concentrate on that. But of course, there is some other art going on. As I mentioned last time, it is very much focused on religion, on Christianity. Art focus is entirely on that. This is a wonderful Psalter from Paris, in the museum in Paris, from the Bibliothèque Nationale. And it's just amazing because, look at this figure here. This is a classical figure. This is night, personification of night. And this little figure here is dawn trotting in. And there, Isaiah, in between, you think, this is odd. This is a pagan idea, this idea of night. But this is what the artists are working with. And this is why they call it a Renaissance in a sense, because it's a sort of classical revival. Look how beautifully she's done her robes and the mantle, which is the sky with all the stars in it. I don't know how well you can see back there, but it's just all done on a gold background, just stunning, absolutely stunning. And again, from the same Psalter, David crowned by Saul, a story from the Bible. And interesting enough, the crowning is actually what the Byzantine bodyguards did to a new emperor. They raised the emperor on their shields. Now, this does have a connection because, of course, some of those bodyguards were Varangians and some of them were Saxons. So Harold Hardrada, of course, who came to try and conquer Britain and lost out to William, not to William, sorry, to Harold, was in the Varangian Guard. So there was a connection between Britain and Byzantium. And this was really a Germanic ritual rather than a Roman one. Roman emperors weren't, in the time when the empire was won, weren't put on shields. But as I mentioned last time, the emperors liked to have around them foreign troops in their bodyguard, and this was their tradition. So it was a Germanic tradition of raising the emperor on a shield. And at this period, we get a lot of very interesting ivories as well. And this is also fascinating in terms of trade routes and where is the ivory coming from. But this one has a particular significance for us because this is a Luton Hoo ivory. Now, what happened was this man, Julius Charles Werner, made a fortune out of diamonds in South Africa. And he bought his way into the English aristocracy. And he bought Luton Hoo. And he brought with him his fantastic collection. And amongst his collection was this amazing triptych with the Virgin who shows the way, Hodegetria, now in the British Museum. So well worth looking at. And it has that local connection. For many years, it was in Luton Hoo. And then his grandson had to sell because of the death duties, and it was bought by, no, not his grandson, it was his, yes, it was his grandson who had to sell it. He had to sell it, and that's how the collection came down. So, but interesting that it was actually at one point in Luton Hoo, a bit of local Byzantine treasure. And you can see, we think this is Nicholas. Not always easy to identify the saints, but they do have particular characteristics. This is John Chrysostom, who was a great preacher, John, the golden mouth he was called. And he's always shown as very receding hair. So we can know who John was. And then military saints, St. Theodore and St. George. A wonderful piece of ivory carving with two angels either side. And she's very elegant. She's very long, and you see her robes very carefully and balancing the child perfectly. Not looking directly, slightly looking away from us, but a wonderful piece of art. So you can see why people were talking about it being a Macedonian Renaissance, because of this classicism coming back in. Now I'm going to whiz you off to three very important churches. Well, we're going to duck in between, but three very important churches that show that scheme I was talking about in Greece. And some of you, how many of you have been to Hosias Lukas? Quite a few of you, yes. An amazing monastery church. And we're going to be looking at the main church, which is the Catholicon here. And this is a chance for me to explain what a squinch is. Last time we talked about pendentives. There's a pendentive, which is really a triangular section cut out of a sphere. But a squinch is like a niche. And it's used here quite cleverly so that the dome is really an octagon sitting on these squinches. And the squinch then becomes quite a useful place to decorate. And you'll find scenes from the life of Christ are usually put in the squinch. Oh, I didn't point out where I should have just shown on the map. There's Hosias Lukas there. We're going to visit Daphne and we're going to visit in Chios, the Neomone monastery church there. So we're in the 10th century. This is, ignore this later fresco here. What we want to concentrate on is really the apse here, where we've again got a virgin and child, very simply this time on her own, representing that. But then in the squinch here, this one's plain, but the other two are decorated. But here we have the Nativity, the birth of Christ. And it's packed with stuff to tell you what's going on. Fascinating. When I first saw this as a student, I was amazed because, so what's going on here? This is Christ having his first bath, and the nurse doesn't believe in his divinity. No. So what happens? Of course, these are all apocryphal. No, her arm is paralyzed. Her arm is paralyzed. That'll teach her. It's a bit vindictive for a baby to do that. But anyway, so, but isn't it it's a wonderful scene. And then we've got the three magi here, got a disconsolate Joseph. He's always disconsolate and doesn't know what's going on. A beautiful virgin in her purple raiment, a very elongated, remember this is quite a curve. It's got to go around for the mosaicist to go around. The angels here and the shepherds over here. So it's packed with information, visual story of what is going on, all done in this beautiful gold and colored stone mosaic. So you're getting the idea, just to sort of repeat, we've got the top, the heaven, divine, as we come down, stories of the Holy Land, and then as we go down at the bottom, we get the saints themselves, the icons of the saints. And of course here, you've actually got iconostasis with the more modern icons, 17th and 18th century icons. And now we're going off to Chios, and this lovely, very high domed church in Chios. Again, slightly different, but again, a centrally planned church. This is over here where it is. And you can see how high the dome is and just see it there. A monastery church. And we know that this church was founded by the emperor, we'll come back to him in a minute, Constantine IX Monomarchus. So we've got a pretty good date of when this church was, 1042 to 1055. And what we're going to look at is, again, one of the squinches. And this is the baptism of Christ. And again, it's full of stuff. It's full of story. And it's like a continuing story. So we start off and we end up here with Jesus. And this is really interesting. The classical tag, see this figure here? This is personification of the River Jordan. So again, a classical idea, the personification. These stories have got to be fully told. You've got to fully understand what's going on. So it's a wonderful John the Baptist and angels waiting with towels for Jesus when he comes out. And that's all done in this great curved area, beautifully done. So over here, you can see the detail. There's the River Jordan and almost naked Christ and the dove. The hand of God as a dove coming down there. Just see there. Any of you been to Neomone? No. Next time you go to Chios, or Greek island holiday, look it up. Back to Hagia Sophia, because we've got two really interesting mosaics to look at. We're going to look at, first of all, this mosaic, which is Constantine IX Monomarchus, who built the monastery church we've just seen. And it was discovered in the 1930s in this gallery here, not far from there's the main apse, in the gallery up there, two mosaics that had not been destroyed, but had been covered over during the Islamic period. And they were restored again by great archaeologist Whitmore in the 1930s. This is just to show you what is. There's the apse. We were looking at the Theotokos, and here's the gallery. First of all, gallery up here. And that's the one we're going to look at first, and then the second one we're going to look there. And this is Constantine Monomarchus. And Constantine married Zoe, who was the last, really, of the Macedonian dynasty, the last great ruler of the Macedonian dynasty, although she had a sister who also had to marry Theodora afterwards. But Zoe had three husbands, and Monomarchus was the last one. And we've got a clue that this mosaic wasn't really him, and originally, because if you look at, this is his name up here, Constantine, it's pretty poor, and Monomarchus tacked on here. This is much better. As you can see, the faithful king of the Romans is, you probably, even if you don't know Greek, you can probably just see that what looks like a P there is the Greek R, and that's telling you that it's the Romans there. And this is Basileus, which is, of course, the Greek for king. So there he is. We think probably this was actually for the previous husband, Romanus. When he was out of the way, died, Constantine stepped in, and so the mosaicists quickly had to change. Not a very good piece of work. I think we'd send that back, when we'll certainly ask for a rebate. That's not the best quality. Whereas Zoe, she stays the same. There she is, Pius, the Pius Augusta, and a wonderful Jesus blessing us, holding the Gospels. And again, he's looking a bit sideways. And I think this is interesting because usually we'd expect him to be looking, but he's in quite a narrow passageway in the gallery. So to actually look that way, he covers more ground as we look at him. And even Monomarchus is looking away, looks a bit of he's in a bit of a dream. They're not actually focused on us in the way that we've seen them previously. But look at the jewels and the robe, and he's carrying money, a gift, because he sponsors obviously the church, and that's the important thing about it. So we think this is probably middle of the 11th century, and it's a wonderful mosaic. Many of you will have seen it, I'm sure. I mean, how many have seen it? Most of you. It's going to be covered over now. There will be days when it will be revealed. Initially, they said it would only be covered over on Fridays, but I think now they've decided it's going to be more covered over. And I had bad stories about what's happening to some of the other mosaics, not in the Hagia Sophia, but in Istanbul. Now we're going back to Greece to see Daphne. And I know many of you have seen the church in Daphne. Here it is, again, centrally planned church with the apse, 2 small apses, and the nave. And you can just see how it works here. The saints at this lower level, the squinches here, the apostles here, and right in the center of the dome is this amazing face of Jesus looking down at us. And this is the true Pantocrator, the ruler. And look, again, he sees us wherever we are. Some people say the eyes follow you around. He's very stern. And this is the absolutism of Christianity at this stage. A masterpiece of the 11th century. I'm now going to take us back to the Hagia Sophia, and we're going to look at another mosaic on this gallery, and this one of John II and his Queen Irene. Just to remind you where they are, just here, gallery. Oh, by the way, I mean, those of you who haven't been, these big discs are parts of the Quran, which have always remained there since they were put up after the conquest. So they were there even when it was a museum. And this is the mosaic, go back, of John. And this is a new dynasty, the Comnene dynasty. Alexius being the first of these, and John II was a very successful military commander who saved Byzantium again at a very tricky time after they'd been severely defeated by the Seljuk Turks. And his wife, Irene, who was, as you can see, a redhead, very glamorous lady. Here's John, and you can see from the inscription what is saying is John in Christ the God, faithful king, born in the purple. So he was born in the purple. Now, what does that mean? Literally, it meant that he was born in a purple room in the palace. This was a way of trying to pass on legitimacy to your son, to make sure there was some inheritance. So he was born, his father was an emperor, and he was born in the purple room. So that was its way of, constantly you can see in all the inscriptions, the propaganda of the emperors, they are trying to shore up their legitimacy as to why they're there. Either conquerors or God has got them there, or in this case, he's a legitimate heir of the Comnenides, born in the purple. And then Irene over here, and I left that in Greek, but it's just the empress. And this is the consort of John Komnenos. And she was actually a foreign queen. And one of the things that the Byzantines were doing at this stage was getting alliances outside the empire by either marrying a princess from somewhere else or sending their princesses out to marry, to try and create alliances, just in the same way we saw marriage and princesses being used in the medieval period as a way of creating alliances. I'm afraid in those days, your daughter was very much your property who you shuffled off to sort out and create a new alliance. Things have changed, I think. So they're more direct, but again, it's the same idea. They're next door, and I'm sure when they designed this, the idea was to have the dynasties, and it creates that more legitimacy. It's just one more in the line of emperors. Now, I'm going to finish with this church in North Macedonia. And I don't know how many who have been to this, but this is the church of St. Panteleimon, who is the saint of healing and health, very important. And it's a monastery church, a small monastery church, outside the mainstream, but nevertheless, a church that was built by an emperor, Alexis Komnenos, a nephew of John II, not the emperor. Sorry, I said the emperor, but he wasn't the emperor. He was a prince. And it's a lovely little church, quite tiny, monastery church. And I think it's 3 years ago, my wife and I went to visit it. And we'd been once, and then we wanted to go back a second time, and it was locked. And I sent my wife off to negotiate with a monk who was so kind, he unlocked it, let us in, and went away. Just left us there. I was just amazed, because this is a national treasure. And we were just given this private audience to this wonderful little monastery church. And this is one of the masterpieces that is in the church. And it shows the lamentation of Jesus. And what is so interesting about it is, we've been talking about Byzantine art in a way as if it doesn't show emotions. If you think back to those panels of the emperors and you think back to the squinches, they are figures presented to you as if they're almost in isolation. But here, look at the grief of Mary and John. The emotion in this is quite amazing. And we think at this time, there's influences between the East and West moving both ways, and the art is developing in a slightly different way. And we'll see that certainly in the last period of how Western art and feelings and emotion begins to infiltrate into Byzantine art, which previously has been not entirely free of emotion, but much more schematic in the way it presents things. And I say almost like isolated icons, as if there's no relationship. Whereas here, the relationship is absolutely incredible. And it's a marvelous fresco, not a mosaic. Obviously, it's easier fresco to create that sort of subtlety, but nevertheless, still with the classical robing and anatomy, but the emotion, the tears, you can see the way John is bent over holding the hand, a really stunning emotional piece. my final slide. This is a very famous icon, which I'm sure many of you know. Vladimir, Mother of God. Vladimir, in this case, is a place just east of Moscow, the monastery where it was. And what we think, though we cannot prove this, is that it was a gift sent by the Greek Patriarch of Constantinople round about 1131 to the Duke Yuri Dolgoruki of Kiev. And we think it was sent then, and it ended up in Vladimir. And this is an icon, again, full of feeling and emotion, and became the basis for many Russian icons. Wonderful coloring. The robing is fairly schematic, but it's the faces that draw you in, and the Virgin's face with those eyes. And the story goes that, of course, she is seeing the future. She is seeing what is going to happen to Jesus, the crucifixion, all the ghastliness. Whereas the child, and it is more like a child now than a young adult, looking up, embracing, looking for reassurance, an amazing emotional piece. So you've got both the idea of the icon representing another world, but also something that not you just communicate through, but communicates to you. Thank you very much. Now, if you were disappointed and you thought it's all over, there's more to come. This is the next final Byzantine Art 3, which I hope you'll be able to attend. But this is my coup de grace now. I mentioned last week about the Peace Bench, and we now have a date when our lovely new dean, Joe Kelly-Moore, is going to come and bless this bench here. So that's going to be great. Everybody's invited. 27th of June, 12:30. Do come. Oh, yes. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much. I hope everybody can sort of hear me in here. Because we've got PA feeding into our recording, we are having to use the microphone for all of your questions. Tim will respond with his microphone on, so there'll be a bit of a mute juggling going on, but that will stop too much feedback. Would anybody like to start off the questions for Tim? Go on then.
Do we have any idea how these mosaics were made? Were they made on the ground and put up, or did you do Michelangelo and do it on a trestle?
That's a very good question, because generally with mosaics, you might think about Roman mosaics here, we thought about how the different techniques, and we can tell, say, for in Roman Britain, that sometimes they were made up and slotted in. But we're pretty sure in this case that all of them were done in situ. So they would be up on scaffolding, having to do it, which, you know, the challenges of the surfaces would make it very difficult to actually put anything in. So they were having to do it. And they did, to be fair, get it sometimes wrong in terms of perspective when they were, particularly when they were doing with dealing with a dome, really difficult to deal with. But a very good question, yes, because it would be easy, wouldn't it, to do it down the ground and then just plonk it in. But
how many bits did they drop when they did that?
Oh, haven't a clue. Haven't a clue. I don't think anyone, you know, we love experimental archaeology, and I was talking about the Greek fire and how we like to do things. I don't think anyone's actually tried to put a squinch mosaic in. I may be wrong. So someone can email me with a correction that someone's tried it. But yes, you'd worry about the gold, wouldn't you? Someone must have been accounting for it and keeping an eye on it. It wouldn't just be using gold easily. Yes.
Thank you. How widespread are these sorts of mosaics across the region? I mean, we've seen some beautiful examples here. Are there very few, or are there quite a few?
Well, relatively few surviving in what was the Byzantine Empire in the eastern part because of history. And first of all, the big, which we'll come on to next week, the big problem with Constantinople itself was the 1204 crusade, which sacked Constantinople. Constantinople had been the only city in the ancient world that had continuity all the way through. And then in 1204, it got sacked by the Crusaders, and they looted and burnt quite a bit of it. So that's Constantinople. Outside Constantinople, it was mainly the monasteries which could afford mosaics. So they are, as you can imagine, were the most expensive end. Why North Macedonia, which we went to, or you go to Serbia, go further out, you're usually getting frescoes, which are a cheaper version. And they've survived quite well in many areas and been restored. In the eastern part of what is now Turkey, most have got damaged. There are some fine ones, frescoes still surviving in what is modern Trabzon, which was the ancient city of Trebizond. And back in the 50s, that was restored with a United Nations grant. So that has survived, but they're very far and few between, I'm afraid, because of just the history of what's happened. If you go to and I'm sure you'll just get to catch an easy jet next week. If you go to the Grand Mosque in Damascus, you will see mosaics there, which were put up after the conquest, but it's clearly they're Byzantine mosaicists putting them up. And of course, they're non-figural. They're about vegetation and things, but you can just see stylistically, they relate to the sort of thing we were looking at previously in Ravenna. So that they were utilizing the mosaicists there, but obviously with no icons and no figurative art.
Yeah, I'm just going to turn this screen off because as much as we all enjoy seeing you, Tim, having 5 of you all in varying degrees of size might be slightly odd. Was there any other question? Yes, hang on a second.
A comment rather than a question. Just to add to the last one, if you want to see Greek mosaics, there's the Greek Church of Hagia Sophia in Moscow Road in Bayswater. And they are mosaics, they're much more modern, they're 19th century. So the Pantocrata is very sort of westernized, but it does give you the feel for the mosaics and what it's like to be in a Greek Orthodox church, which it is.
Well, that's lovely then. Are you still on mute? In which case, it will be my job to round up and say a huge thank you to you, Tim, for something that is billed as an introduction to. I am never fails to amaze me how much information you can download to all of us in a very engaging, very funny, and very informative way. So a huge thank you, Tim, and we shall very much look forward to the 9th of June for your 3rd installation. But please do join me with a round of applause to say thank you very much to Professor Tim.
Thanks very much. Thank you.